Welcome, welcome to EDUP Accelerated Excellence, a podcast for the advancement of educational effectiveness and equity. I am your host, Jacob Easley II, PhD, PMP. In this episode, we sit down with Dr. Elsa Núñez, who reflects on her 18 years presidency of Eastern Connecticut State University. She discusses how to lead an elite liberal arts public institution in the absence of elitism. Let's get into it. This episode of EDUP Accelerated Excellence is supported in part by Eastern Connecticut State University. The path to your future begins at Eastern Connecticut State University. Explore a campus buzzing with creativity, innovation, and opportunity. From arts to sciences, we have programs that spark your curiosity and ignite your passion. Don't miss your chance to discover what makes Eastern unique. Visit us online to create your customized viewbook at easternct.edu/journey. That's easternct.edu/journey. Here we are with another wonderful guest I have with me today. And I'm so delighted because I have worked with this individual. She hired me, took a chance on me, I would say, to become dean for the School of Education and Professional Studies and Graduate Division. And that was a very fruitful relationship, I believe. I learned a tremendous amount of information and gained skills and a general sense of efficacy and a renewed love for higher education. So with us today is Dr. Elsa Núñez. She is an author, an advocate, lifelong educator, and accomplished higher education leader working across multiple states, and is currently the president of Eastern Connecticut State University. Welcome, Dr. Núñez.
Thank you, Dr. Easley. And I will say this, that we were honored to have you at Eastern, and we were very upset when you left. You were
Oh,
a wonderful addition to the administration and faculty.
well, thank you. I have to say that it was really a matter of teamwork. I know you said one time you told me don't be modest, but it really is a matter of teamwork with working with the provosts there and the faculty and staff. It really is a place, Eastern, that I hold dearly in my heart. And I've been back to campus when I've traveled through Connecticut, but it's usually on the weekends, so no one is there. I got to see some of the new buildings that we were working on and
Yeah,
the redesign of Goddard Hall. Although I have not seen the inside of it.
it's beautiful. It's actually very beautiful.
So I trust that it is, and hopefully one day I'll get there. So
Good.
when we get started, I have with a conversation for our EdUp Accelerated Excellence community. So let's start from the beginning. With your calling to become the 6th president of Eastern Connecticut State University. How did you know when you were prepared and ready for the position? And those are two different constructs. So preparedness is sort of the material resources and the skills, and then readiness is the sort of emotional fortitude
hmm
and that idea in your mind and in your heart to say, I can do this. So when did you find yourself ready and prepared for the position to
Well,
take?
Dr. Easley, that's such a good question. Because I was in a way very fortunate that my husband was a university president, Richard Freeland. He was president of Northeastern University in Boston. And because he was president, it delayed my being president because we decided as a couple we weren't going to be two presidents because it would put too much pressure on our marriage and our, in our family life, that
Mhm.
he would someday step down. And when he stepped down, I would step up to a presidency. So during the time he was president, many, many years, I was provost 4 times.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so when you look at my resume, people would say, why did you do a lateral 4 times. Now, it was 2 vice presidents of academic affairs at a system level and then 2 campus provostships. And I say to people, it was the best thing that happened to me. It was by accident. And I always tell young people, don't be in a rush to become a president or to become a vice president. Pay your dues. And by that, I mean, get the experience at the lower level. So when people kvetch at Eastern and complain about this or that, I say, I agree with you. I was a dean. I was an associate dean. I was a provost many times. I had to make tough decisions, and it's hard to manage in the ways that you're managing. And so I have empathy and support that I give people that report to me, because I really do believe that my ladder up was not a trajectory which was fast up to the top. It was very slow. And during the time that I had the 4 second in command positions, I worked for different people. And during that time, I realized this is how I want to be, and this is how I don't want to be. And so when I took the presidency, I was really ready, Dr. Easley. I felt that I had really learned a lot in those 4 positions, being number 2, and that I would be a very good number 1 because I had learned from some very competent people how to be an effective number 1.
I really like that because your message is about this notion of sustained development, or this development over time, which leads to sustainability within the profession and one's effectiveness in a role. When today so many folks want instant gratification.
Right. They rush to the position and they're really not ready.
Absolutely. So now for folks who are not familiar with Eastern and its role within the Connecticut State College and University system, can you briefly describe, for the listening audience, the structure and unique attributes of both the system and Eastern as it sits within the system?
Yeah. Well, Eastern is Connecticut's only public liberal arts college. There's one per state. Not every state has a public liberal arts college. The first one to be founded was Geneseo, which is part of SUNY. And it's a wonderful thing that the people in New York State said, a liberal arts education is the she education. It's the best education in the world, basically. It was Harvard colleges, started as the first liberal arts college, and it was primarily for men. And people said, why does this education have to be private and elite? Why can't it be public and open up to many people who otherwise couldn't afford to get a liberal arts education? And so I had the benefit of coming to Eastern just right after it was given the designation of public liberal arts. COPLAC is the college, the council rather, of public liberal arts colleges in the country, and we're part of that. So Eastern sits in a system, the Connecticut State University system, and there are 17 units. There are 12 community colleges, 4 state universities, and then an online operation, which is called Charter Oak. So we report to a chancellor, and in this case, it's Chancellor Chang, and we are ruled by the Board of Regents, and the policies and procedures all come from one board for all 17 units. However, we are independent entities because we're chartered by the legislature, separately. So Eastern has the benefit of having its own mission, its own identity, and its own purpose. And that helps us with planning, as you can well imagine. It helps us with investments in certain areas connected to planning, because we are focused on our mission, which is to be Connecticut's only public liberal arts college. And so with that, when I came, I said, well, that's wonderful that we're Connecticut's only public liberal arts college, but how do you marry that to issues of equity and issues that are of importance to me as a woman of color in terms of access to a quality education? So we've spent many years, I'm president almost 20 years now and getting ready to retire, trying to marry excellence and access. And I think we've been successful here, Dr. Easley.
I like that. I remember at one point there was a tagline that says, liberal arts practically applied.
We still use that.
Still use
We
that?
still use that.
Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, to our listeners, when you go to college and you finish, you want a job. the parents always ask in an admissions process, will my son or daughter get a job? Because
Right.
liberal arts has the label that it doesn't lead to anything. And that's not true. The Fortune 500 company said they would rather hire a liberal arts graduate than anything else because they can teach them this, the content for the
Hmm.
job, but they can't teach the skills that a liberal arts education allows you to develop. And that's critical thinking, analytical reasoning, oral and written communication, and of course, an ethical foundation for doing your work. And so it is a real benefit to get a liberal arts education. And then if you could practically apply it, which we say do internships, right? Do co-op while you're here. So as of sophomore year, the students go out into the workforce and apply the skills that they're learning. So if they're on teams in a company, they know how to work collaboratively because that's part of a liberal arts education. If they're problem solving with a team or by themselves, they understand they have to use their analytical skills and their, all of the systematic thinking that they've been trained to develop over the 4 years. So practically applied has implications for employment or graduate school.
Hmm. That makes sense. So now thinking back on your tenure as president, and we'll get to this notion of retirement. I'm not sure if folks have called a vote for no retirement on campus, but thinking about your tenure as president, what has been the most surprising, what has surprised you the most about higher education that that you did not anticipate, and how has it shaped your leadership? So what surprised you the most?
Yes. Well, when I took my presidency and started the work, I paid a lot of attention to technology because in those days, 20 years ago, everybody was saying technology is going to change everything, the way we teach, the way we learn, the way we take in information. During that period, the iPhone, the iPad, all of these technological advances came to fruition. And so I made strategic investments in technology, which later on, actually during COVID, paid off because
Mhm.
we were able to do a lot of things other universities weren't able to do because of the technology infrastructure. So I was ready for that, and I was interested intellectually about how to connect technology and effective teaching and effective learning, but I was not prepared for social media.
Mhm.
I was not prepared for the acceleration of what we call now for this generation alpha, the use of social media for
Mhm.
everything. They don't do email. They now barely don't even want to do text. It's all Instagram, TikTok, And so I've had to change my thinking. And I'm, at the end of my career and depended on people at the university to lead me and educate me on to the most effective uses of social media for admissions, for
Mhm.
teaching, for learning, for communication in general. And I never expected social media to take up all the space that it's
Mhm.
taken up in higher education. Some of it is positive, and as you know, Dr. Easley, some of it is not positive. But nonetheless, presidents have to pay attention to social media. Too
Mhm.
much is going on that affects the way higher education conducts itself in the context of social media. So I would say that's the biggest surprise to me. I never expected something like social media to come into my space and take over the way it did.
I think that's true for many of us. I was just talking to a colleague about how back, years ago when there wasn't social media, and now, folks feel free to share lots of things that we would probably thought were a bit more intimate on social media. So it's a way of being seen, and we become in some ways desensitized. So I'm sure it probably has its pros and cons in terms of how folks see each other, how much they share about each other, and how they engage and interact with each other as well.
Yeah, and sometimes it's used as a weapon. So students get scared of social media as well.
Right. I can see that happening as well. So Eastern, like most small or medium-sized public institutions, are highly dependent on enrollment and for their financial stability. So what has been your approach for managing enrollment and its ebbs and flows over the years while remaining committed to providing, as you mentioned earlier, you talked about equitable and access, but affordable and high quality education.
Yeah.
So ebbs and flows and managing the cost, which is probably access, and ensuring high quality.
Yeah, well, this goes to the core of my presidency, because when I first started as president, everybody would come running in my office and say, "We got to market Eastern. We got to market Eastern. We have to do more branding. We have to market Eastern." And
Mm,
I once stopped and said to a person who was pressing me to do that, I said, "What do you want to market?
mm,
What is it that you want to market? I haven't even thought about where is Eastern today? What is what is it that we want to tell people about Eastern? What is our story?
mhm.
Because to market emptiness, to market generalities, come to Eastern, we're a great college. That to me was really lacking substance. And I said, I need to work on the substance first, and I'll come back to the marketing.
Right.
And that has really helped us because in my beginning years, through a strategic planning process, and Dr. Easley, we've done three strategic plans during my
Right.
presidency and had a lot of participation. We were able to define Eastern beyond its public liberal arts mission. Let me give you a concrete example. In a meeting, in a strategic planning meeting, a faculty member noticed that I was grappling with these concepts of I want to be number one, ranked number one by US News and World Report in New England. And
Right.
we accomplished that. But in those days, that was just an idea. I had a goal. And at the other end, I had, well, I'm a poor girl who came from nothing. And the reason that I have what I have today is because I got a great public higher education.
Mhm.
So, how do I marry access and this notion that we could be an exemplary, rigorous academic institution, but provide access? And this particular faculty member in the Department of Music looked at me, and within seconds, he said, Elsa, we can be elite without being elitist.
Mm.
It was
Like,
the most profound thought and it just liberated me. I said, of course we can. So I set out to make Eastern elite, which we are. We are in, Princeton Review for green campuses. We've got, as I said, US News and World Report. We've got the highest retention rate, the highest graduation rate in the state of Connecticut after UConn. We have a large percentage of minority faculty, the largest in the state. We have all these markers of excellence, and then we started to focus on access, and we developed a set, Dr. Easley, a set of programs that would allow students to come to Eastern during the summer and
mm,
beef up their skills in reading, writing, and mathematics so that we could admit them. So if they come for 6 weeks in the summer and they get a B in,
mhm.
the courses, then they're admitted into Eastern. If they don't get the B, they're not admitted. So they work very hard, the students, to get the B, and then they're admitted. Most of those students would never have come to Eastern and been part of this academically excellent institution. So I was able to think with the faculty and staff, how do we make sure that these two things are concepts that are real in terms of equity and access? And by having done that, I opened the floodgates to enrollment. In
Right.
other words, people understood who we were. My words were not just President Núñez's words. Even the lowest person in a directorship or below a director could articulate what Eastern was about. That we were not elite, we were elite, but not elitist rather, and that we were providing access to people. So during the downturn, we took a very small hit
Okay.
because we never ever wanted to lower our standards. We have the same standards as UConn for admissions. They're the highest in the Connecticut State University system. We never wanted to lower the standard, so we kept the standard and then lowered the number of people being admitted because we weren't getting the pool that we wanted. And so people would say to me, well, why don't you just admit people with less qualifications? And I say, no, it took us too long to get to here, the highest, the best qualifications that students could bring. So by marrying those two things, we were able to get through the pandemic and through the downturn and all of that. Now we're on the uptick again. We just had, a decision day where people came,
Mm.
just before they made their decision. Families came, students with their mothers and fathers and grandparents and friends. And we were able to, I think we had 1,000 people one day
Oh, that's
for
good.
admission day, families also. So I think that to the listeners, I would say all this branding and marketing, you have to have substance.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about your name, it's about what's behind your name. And I learned that very early on, that if people believe that you are what you say you are and that there's substance there, they will come. We're branded now the way we wanted to be branded, as opposed to just some general things about come to Eastern because of, I don't know what we would have said in those days, but I know that what we ended up saying was a few years into my presidency has yielded great results in terms of enrollment.
But I also think this notion of quality, access and quality are filters into this idea of retention, because you have so many institutions where folks are perhaps given a chance, I believe, if that's how it's couched, but don't necessarily have good retention rates. So holding fast to how do you support individuals, but yet having high expectations and I don't want to use the word standards in the sense of, you know, sort of the traditional sense around measurement, but expectations, high expectations for the quality of the programming is important for retention as well. And you mentioned both strategic planning and your ranking. So I want to get into two of those topics. So strategic planning and implementation are key drivers for institutional success. Can you share Eastern's approach for its perhaps current strategic planning or recent strategic planning process, and what lessons did you learn from that?
Well, I always say to people that be wary of someone who says they did the job for 2 years and then they changed the world.
Oh,
Because in higher education, it's very unlikely you change the world in 2 years because we move very
very
slowly.
slowly,
And
yeah.
so when I took this job, I knew that it would be my only presidency. As long as the faculty and staff and the board wanted me, I would stay. And I've been fortunate that they have been supportive of my presidency, because I knew that to make significant changes would take a long time. And there's no cutting corners when it comes to higher education. You just have to be, willing to stay with it. And
Mhm,
and then that's principle number one. Principle number two was that people had to understand my thinking about the university, and I had to allow them to shape
mhm,
my thinking. In
mhm,
other words, to come in with ideas and try to sell them is one approach, but I just said I don't want to just sell my ideas. I want to say what my ideas are and then have people give me input, and
mhm,
my ideas will be better because I'm working with smart people. How could they not be better, right? These are very smart people working at Eastern. And so when I launched the strategic planning process, I wasn't afraid of people participating and, you know, adding and, shaping my ideas. And so the first strategic plan had 250 people participate
no,
on
that's
different committees. It was huge. And
wow.
people did this and people did that. And we wrote, at the end of the day, in retrospect, it was the strategic plan had too many initiatives.
Mhm,
But I learned for the second round that it was good that I had all the people participating, but that I had to narrow the initiatives. And by the third plan, I said, we don't need new initiatives, because the truth of the matter, Dr. Easley, is that you never really accomplish all of it. It's a
mhm,
work in progress. If you say, I'm going to improve retention, you don't finish that and you're done with it. You consistently improve retention. And so the three plans have built upon each other. And what I have said to young people who want to be administrators and college presidents is the most important thing you can do is have a plan. Because when you don't, when I had a plan from the very beginning, someone would come into my office and say, President Núñez, I'd like you to think about this initiative. And I would say, well, that initiative is very interesting, but it's not in the plan.
mhm,
And the plan has a budget. And
mhm,
so I'm not going to take money out of the budget for your idea when we're funding these ideas that everybody has bought into. And then if somebody came with another idea, I would say, you know what? I think we can fit that into the existing strategic plan. That
mhm,
fits in the plan and it can get funded. So I tied budgeting to the strategic plan, and it made my presidency so much easier because I did not politicize
mhm,
funding this because I liked Dr. Easley, not funding that because I didn't like Dr. Schwartz, or funding this because I love Dr. Simon. And I did none of that politics took place. It was all based on the plan and the budget, and I was able to refer to it over time. So I think those are my lessons learned. One is allow people to shape your ideas, allow them to participate authentically, so that your ideas get enriched and strengthened by that participation, and always connect planning to a budget.
I really like that idea. So have a plan, engage others, and of course, tie that plan to a budget. And I'm sure that helps you in making critical decisions as a leader.
Yes.
And I'm sure that probably has I don't want to say trickle down, but for those who, middle management, so you have deans and directors who have their own budgets. And I think that sort of helps them as well when faculty and staff come to them asking for initiatives. If you have a clear plan and it ties into
Right.
plan, and we have budgetary resources to fund it if funding is needed. So let's talk about this, your rankings. So Eastern has been lauded with many accolades, and you have been noted as top ranking in best colleges in the Northeast. So that's by U.S. News and World Report. So that's from, is it from Maine to Maryland, correct?
Right. Right.
All right. So why would you say those rankings are important? Because, there have been debates about how accurate the ratings are, our rankings are, and does it really mean anything to students? So to you, why would those rankings be important?
Yeah. I always smile and say presidents hate the rankings when they're ranked low, and we love the rankings when we rank high.
Yes.
So I love the rankings. Um, and the rankings are really for parents. Students, not all students look at the rankings. The parents look at the rankings, and people criticize the rankings, and they rightfully have some legitimate criticisms. For example, the variable in the rankings that there's a peer opinion,
Mm-hmm.
by a provost and a president, is subjective. If I say Western is a great school, or if I say, this school is not a great school as a president, it's a subjective assessment. However, there are parts of the rankings that variables in the rankings that are very important. So class size,
Mm-hmm.
faculty student ratio, the amount of money you put into your infrastructure. Those variables are really important in higher education. They're not throwaway variables. Everybody wants a class size that's manageable, unless you're a research one and you have lectures of 400. But for the type of college we are, the variables made sense. And so we decided very early on that we would invest in those variables, meaning what those variables represent. So class size means that you have more faculty so that the classes could be smaller, right? So we invested in faculty. The variables to me meant that they would be connected to the strategic plan and to the budget. And so those variables didn't appear in the plan as U.S. News and World Report. They were just increase the keep class size at 20 or under 20, except for a few sections that are at 40. So all that appeared in the plan. And so it became almost automatic that those variables were there. We were investing in them, and with almost not a lot of attention. Over the years, we just kept investing in the variables that we thought made sense for us as a top tier academic institution that would be cited as academically rigorous. And lo and behold, over time, the investments paid off. And that's how we got to number one in New England. And I really do believe that that institutions can improve I don't mean rankings, but improve the quality of their education, improve the quality of the student experience, because that's really important. And all of that affects retention and graduation rates. And that's money in the bank. Instead of having your students flood out and then you have to get new students to replace them, you're retaining your students. They're graduating. It's a mark of a good institution when you have. Our retention rate is 85%, and we're public. That's unheard of. It's unheard
I
of.
applaud you, because that absolutely is wonderful. And that's
And
something I look at retention rates. I don't, and I think because I'm always concerned about what is the disruption and what is your time towards degree completion if you drop out and have to start again
Right.
for a number of reasons. We know sometimes those can be economic, sometimes those can be issues back home if one's family, if one is living on campus, and or it could just be an issue of underpreparedness academic.
Hmm.
So that's really beautiful. I appreciate
Yeah.
those
And
retention rates.
Dr. Easley, I used to say to people, they say, why do you pay attention to retention and this? And I said to them, you know what? Nobody comes to college to fail out,
Absolutely.
to drop out or fail out. They come to college to graduate. We have to make it possible for them to graduate. Now, there'll always be a student who you can't do any more for and will not finish. But for the most part, if you give them the right supports, they will finish and they will be so happy when they finish. The smiling faces that I see at commencement just lift my heart and soul. I am just so happy for those families and those students that they're graduating. And so retention and graduation is has to be a serious goal for an administration at at a university or college.
I completely agree. So listen, there are camps out there that profess the decline of higher education or the importance of higher education. So you don't need a degree, just go right into the workforce. But what would you say to someone who's considering a college degree in the current climate?
It's interesting. I always say, look, my plumber is a wonderful man and he's a very skilled plumber and charges me a ton of money. But my plumber is a college graduate. He runs his own business, for God's sakes. He's very successful. And he stops and talks to me and says, Elsa, what did you read? And I say, oh, I just finished this book. And he says, well, I've been reading this and I recommend. He's very well rounded. The college degree is not to make money or to get a job only, it's for
Mhm.
your own self worth. Why shouldn't you be a college graduate? Why shouldn't you educate yourself to the most and develop your potential while you're young, or if you come back when you're older, doesn't matter. But why shouldn't you invest in yourself? It's an investment for yourself. Now the rest of it is getting a job and all that, but you can work with your hands as a carpenter. You can be anything you want to be, an artist, without going to college, of course. And you'll probably have a fine life. But why not get a college degree and read and think and be exposed to different ideas and different thinking and be around different people and enhance your intellectual development? It's
Mhm.
for you. A college degree is for you. It's not for the only the purpose of getting a job. So I would say, of course you should do it. You don't want to be in a place when you're 60 or 70 and say, I wish I had gotten a college degree. I wonder what that would have been like. Just get the degree and you don't need to use it to get, to do things. Like my plumber created a wonderful business. He's happy doing what he does. He employs, a lot of people and he's very successful. So I don't think people should dismiss a college education because they can make money without a college degree. That's not the only thing a college degree can do. I have I have felt as a person of color and coming from such a poor family that I am so privileged to have a college degree. I learned so much about religion, about philosophy, about issues of social justice. I learned about science and math,
Mhm.
things that my brain was just expanded, and then I went on to lifelong learning. I'm still reading and still learning. So I always pitch it to people, get a college degree, then do whatever the hell you want.
And I think it's probably implausible that you don't use what you've learned, perhaps not, all aspects of your degree, but as you mentioned earlier, critical thinking, problem
Yes.
solving, how to be a bit more democratic in your social and professional relationships. I think that does carry over. It influences you. So I want to talk a bit about complexities of leadership because I know that uh, leadership is not necessarily an easy feat, but there's something that I want to address because it has always struck me as odd and interesting, not odd in a bad way. But I would meet people just in different places, and when I told them I had worked at Eastern or did work at Eastern, and I would mention your name, folks knew you. And they weren't, and but they hadn't worked at Eastern, or they had known you from a committee or somewhere. However, what I would hear is that people would talk about how you reached out to them in moments of trial or a moment of need and provided some level of support. Maybe it was just a card, it could have been a phone call, but so I'm calling you a stealth humanitarian.
Yeah.
So it's been done very quietly. Can you share with us why acts of kindness are important to you?
Yeah, well, you're kind to bring this up because I think we talked extensively in the last few minutes about goals and success and all of that. But what really does matter to me at the end of the day, when my children, I close my eyes and my children bury me, is what they'll say about their mother. And I
Hmm.
don't want them to say that their mother uh, is university ranked number one in, in New England. I don't want that said. Of course not. What I want them to say is my mother was a good person. My
Hmm.
mother was helped people and she was kind, and you have to work at that because these jobs sometimes don't give room for you to show your kindness.
Hmm.
Often it's seen as weakness, people. But I have made it my point in my life to, um, if someone is in a bad situation and I know about it, I quietly will reach out and say, I can't do much in the presidency. I have to be careful, but I can do this. And I've had people that, can't get to the bus to pick up their kids after school. And
Hmm.
I have said to them, I can't change your schedule forever, but I can change your schedule for a short amount of time until you can figure this out. And they're so grateful because that opportunity to figure it out makes their life situation very different. I've had people who've had trauma in their life, and I've known about it and I've reached out. I've had people that have been beaten up by life. They have issues, and so I have found that the kindness people have given me, and I have had kindness afforded to me, I get back. Whatever I give, I get back. I'm philosophical and religious about it in many ways, that if you give kindness, people will see you as a kind person and you will get kindness back. And there are times where I've needed kindness, where I've been in a bad situation at Eastern and someone has said, Elsa, you're doing a good job. Or, Elsa, this too shall pass. Sometimes it's just a connection, a short connection. Sometimes it's more substantive than that. But
Right.
I do believe that we don't pay enough attention to trying to reach out to people when they're in the middle of something that to them is overwhelming, and just to say to them, I can do this. If you accept it, I can help you this way. Excuse me. But I do think that society doesn't allow us to do that.
Hmm. That's interesting because I have talking to friends of mine, and this idea around you see in movies where, particularly the immigrant population, when you travel back home, you take lots of presents.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
that's very true.
and there was this idea that those presents in some ways are social currency.
Yeah,
So people remember when you showed an act of kindness. And so when you perhaps are in a place of need, folks, those individuals are more likely uh, reach out and to find ways to support you versus those who perhaps you don't have those kind of contacts. So it's not a banking system that I'm doing it for future,
yeah,
but at the same time, it is recognized by others even when we don't think that it is. So I think that's important. So you talked about this notion of what it is to be a president and things you cannot do as a president, but as an individual. How do you ensure a healthy work-life balance?
well, I think I get an A+ on this one. I
I
give
love it.
myself an A+ because
I'm
I
going to
put
take notes.
I put my family first.
Okay.
There, I am not at all embarrassed about it. I don't, I talk about it openly with young people, and I want to give you a concrete example. I think the listeners would better understand what I'm talking about. when I became president, there was a calendar on my desk. The first, I became president in July, and there was a date on the calendar for the following May. I was appointed that July, so the following May. And I kept saying, why is that date? What does that date sound familiar? So it bothered me, and then I let it go, and then it bothered me some more. And then I went home and I said to my husband, Richard, I said, Richard, do we have anything? Do you remember this date, May, whatever it was? And he said to me, yes, that's the date of Maria, our daughter's graduation from medical school.
Mm-hmm.
I said, oh my God, don't tell me that, because that's the date of Eastern's commencement,
Mm-hmm.
the
Oh,
same exact date.
oh my
I
goodness.
said, oh my God, what am I going to do? So I went to the commencement committee and asked them if we could change Eastern's date. And they told me to go to hell, basically. No, we're not changing Eastern's date. And I said, okay. Then I went home and my husband said, well, we'll hire a helicopter or a plane to fly you from Connecticut to DC, where she was graduating from. And the logistics were impossible because it was almost at the same time,
Mhm.
both commencements. Then my staff said, oh, we'll put you on a big jumbotron here in Connecticut from Washington. Your big face will be on a jumbotron. I didn't want my big face on a jumbotron. And then my daughter said, Mommy, don't worry about it. You've been a wonderful mommy. Daddy will be there, so you don't have to go. And then that made me feel worse, that she was being so kind. So I said, okay. So I put it all out of my mind and left it. And then the time came, and it was February. And in February, I said, I really do have to bite the bullet on this. And then I said, okay, in March, I'm going to send out an email. And so I wrote an email, and in the message line, I put probability. And then the content of the email went like this: what is the probability that the commencement, Eastern's commencement, would be on the same day as my daughter's commencement from medical school?
Mhm.
And I said, it doesn't matter. I'm going to my daughter's commencement in Washington. And then I ended the email and pushed send. Within minutes, the mathematicians told me what the probability was. And I
Oh,
said, that's
Jesus.
not the point of my email. That's not the point of my email. I don't want to know what the probability is. And then I got emails from people saying you made the right choice. And then I went home and I told my daughter, I'm going to be at your commencement. And during commencement, I was a mommy. I didn't call Eastern. The provost took over here. Everybody was fine at Eastern. I told my boss, I'm going to my daughter's commencement. And it was the best thing I did. And I shared that story with a woman who once said to me, I didn't go to my daughter's college graduation because of a conflict at work, and I've lived to regret it. And
Right.
so I've said to myself, all my presidency, my family comes first. Now there are times where, I move things around, and because I'm human and I have a lot of responsibilities, but I'm not ambivalent about it. I'm crystal clear that at the day, when they buy my tombstone and they etch whatever they're going to etch on, they're going to put
Mm,
beloved mother, beloved sister, beloved wife, but
mm.
they are not going to put beloved president on there. So I'm very clear that my family comes first.
Well, that's a lesson in principles, but also a lesson in how to, to the extent possible, to live your life without regret.
Yes,
Because I
yes,
think the regret and guilt would have worn on you, or, weighed on you in some ways. It may have worn you down in
yeah.
other aspects of your
That,
life and your
how
work.
would I have said to my child, my daughter, I love you, but not enough?
Oh,
That would have been the message, right? That my job is more important. I could have gotten fired. I was a new president, so they could have fired me, and I didn't care at that point. I said, she comes first.
mm-hmm. No, bravo, brava. So let's talk a bit about equity and educational effectiveness. So what does educational excellence look like for Eastern? And just sort of sum it up for us if you had to give the elevator speech.
Yeah. Well, I think, excellence is somewhat in the eyes of the beholder. People will tell you excellence means this to me, and it's different for what it means to another person. But to me, it has a lot to do with the quality of the education that you're providing. And so when we graduate a student, that student has to be able to demonstrate a skill set that is defined as a college level skill
Mhm.
set that is in critical, as I mentioned before, critical thinking, analytical reasoning, systematic, data analysis, all of the skills that we want someone to learn. And so when we do assessments of students, um, and we have a system of assessing their work,
Mhm.
we validate that they have those skills. To me, once the students reach the level that we have pitched for them, that we have created for them as a faculty, then the institution has reached excellence. You can't reach excellence unless the students have reached the markers that you have laid out for them. And I do believe that there are institutions where students squeeze out of that and
Mhm.
graduate without the writing skills, without the mathematical analytical thinking skills. And I don't think an institution has done its job at, in terms of academic rigor and excellence unless all students, regardless of where they started, what their backgrounds are, must achieve the minimum standard that you have set for them.
So, that really does tie into brand identity for an organization as well, to ensure that students meet those espoused outcomes and skills and proficiencies that you believe in. And I'm just say, and mindsets as well, not just the intangible, but also the tangible. So being able to work well with others, for example,
Oh my God. Yeah.
is disposition and as well as a skill. But I think that those kind of ideas of holding some account for what students know, are able to do, and who they are as they graduate does tie into brand identity for the organization. And so, what would you say that equity looks like at Eastern?
Yeah. Well, when I started our special programs, I mentioned earlier in our conversation about summer, they come in the summer.
Right.
When we started those programs, I said to the high school guidance counselor that I met with, Yale wants all the A's, UConn wants all the B pluses and A's. Everybody wants those. Nobody wants the C minus student.
Mhm.
Nobody wants that student. To me, equity means providing opportunity for people who otherwise might not have it. And
Mhm.
that's really important to me. That sure, getting black and brown people that all have all A's is easy. They might not come to Eastern because they would have different opportunities in their mind better because they're Ivy League schools. um, but what's that mean? That everybody's going to pursue, equity through that standard, that lens, which is people have to have demonstrated that they can achieve that level
Mhm.
when they're 18 years old. Well, you know that life circumstances doesn't allow people to demonstrate that. So if you're an immigrant living 12 people in an apartment, you might not be able to get straight A's. If you're if you're living an apartment where the people get shot on the street corner, you may not be able to get straight A's. If your mother's in jail for drugs, if you've never met your father because he's been incarcerated, or
Mhm.
these are life circumstances. How could you get A's? So
Mhm.
if you get C's, to me, that's an achievement. So equity means allowing people with potential,
Mhm.
teach people with grit to come and to a public institution that is really rigorous and flourish.
Mhm.
So I have spent my life's work identifying those people to enter Eastern and flourish here, and giving them a safe place to be, a place where people will say to them, you're smart, you're intelligent, you have potential, you're creative. They don't hear those things
Mhm.
many times, but they're in a safe environment in our dormitories, in our classrooms. To me, that's equity. That is really equity, not finding everybody whose life circumstances is perfect and they get A's.
Yep, I actually like that. So, what advice, and you've already alluded to some of this, but if you had to say the keys or ingredients, what advice would you give to others seeking higher education effectiveness and equity um, in the context of continual economic, political, or cultural change? So perhaps differently from what you shared earlier, but for other institutions. So what advice would you give leaders?
Make sure that you have the conversations in a cultural context at your institution. every institution's different. And if you jump into these goals without having conversations, the people may not be ready. You
Mm,
need to talk about what does equity mean in that institution? What are the issues of social justice that people are concerned about in that institution or in their society, in general? What are the values of that institution? What would they change to make students feel welcome? Because if you don't have, Dr. Easley, those conversations, students are never going to fit in. They're never going to feel part of the institution. That you're going to bring them in and they're going to either leave or drop out or whatever because the culture isn't welcoming. And I think people move too fast to the solution without talking about the problem. And the problem often is that you haven't talked about these concepts with each other, the faculty with each other, with the staff, with other students, and then eventually everybody buys into the agenda. And
mm,
once you have buy into the agenda, implementing the agenda is not complicated. It is getting people to understand what the goals of the institution are and buying in and accepting that that's where the institution is going to go. That's where you're going to put resources, monetary and, personnel resources. But if you don't have that conversation, you start getting friction. People
mm.
say, well, why are you doing this and not doing that? Why is this going this way and not that way? So I think having conversations, which take a long time, you can't do it in a semester. It takes years to have these conversations. And sometimes you just get bored with it and you just say, oh my God, we're still talking about this. But it does, if you put in that kind of time, you will have a cultural shift.
And I think even with those conversations, you're still gonna have individuals that question,
Yes, yes, but it's
but
not the majority.
not the majority. Absolutely. So you've already alluded to a retirement. So what's next for Elsa Núñez as you close this chapter of your presidency?
Well, tonight I'll be teaching my class at Harvard, and I was very fortunate to get an appointment at Harvard, and I'll be teaching a public policy in higher education. So that I'll be, I have a couple of boards that I'll still continue to be on. For example, I'm on the Iceland Board of Higher Education. Iceland is a small country with 8 universities, and they for assessment of their universities, they bring an outside team, and the outside team is all Europeans and one American, and I'm the one American on the Iceland board. So I go to Iceland 4 times a year,
Oh, that's
and I'll be, continue my work at Harvard, and I find that very rewarding. Very rewarding. It's very time consuming and demanding, but I like it. I started off as an English teacher, so I'm going to end up as a faculty member again.
a question though. Are you teaching in person or online?
Tonight is online. I teach one course in person and one online, but tonight is online. I
Okay.
don't like it as much.
Well, that sort of brings us full circle from that beginning of what you learned about investing in technology and
In
then in
technology, yeah.
social media. And so now here you are, um, transitioning, post presidency, teaching both in person and online. So the best of both worlds.
Absolutely. Well stated.
So, Dr. Núñez, thank you so much. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
the opportunity to speak with you and to learn from you and learn with you.
Well, it's been my pleasure, Dr. Easley, and thank you for having me on the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for engaging with the EDUP Accelerated Excellence community. You can find this episode and others on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Apple Music. And if you like this episode, please don't forget to follow us and share within your network.